What's up, everybody? This is Illiterate. This week we are covering The Godfather. My name is Evan. I watched all 3 opening episodes of The Offer on Paramount Plus.
My name is Taylor, and I dove into Mario Puzo's rare autobiography.
This is a great opportunity to celebrate and get into the phenomena that is The Godfather. We're not so much going to be talking about the other sequels as much, but as so much Godfather as a whole and the gusto that gets us up to the events of the show, The Offer.
Right, because The Offer is not following everyone. It's centered around one of the producers, Albert Ruddy's experience. Even the show I saw, usually it's like based on this book or based on this article, or it says based on Albert S. Ruddy's experience of making The Godfather. So literally just his fallible memories. He's 91 now. So
I'm amazed the guy is around and he is like involved. He's executive producing. It's a lovely little film school for anybody that has or has ever had the interest of that kind of thing, into movies at all. This could be a plug and play for a lot of different big projects.
Well, yeah.
So it's even all the more fascinating that it seems ridiculous, the events that happen. And from what I understand, almost all of it's true. But we're not so much going to be getting into the weeds and the nitty gritty of the show.
Yeah.
We're going to be dancing around it all. In particular, Mario, because I really have no idea anything about him up until the events of the show start. And again, this is a guy that has his name over the title. Everywhere you see The Godfather, he's attached to it. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about him and all of these characters, because this is really an interesting cast of characters.
Because like I said, his autobiography is rare. I was able to get a copy. It was only published in 1972, shortly after, as a thing where he said, I'm going to just put this one thing out. Nobody else talked to me, because he didn't do interviews for 20 years. There's only one that I could find of him on Charlie Rose in 1996. And then I found a transcript of when he was on Larry King the same year. But there really isn't much him talking about his side of things. And like we said, the show is Albert S. Ruddy's experience, and so it's his also perception of what is true, because there was no consultation from anybody else, the other producers, Coppola. So it's kind of,
well, they're all dead, so no, I'm just kidding. They're not all dead.
Or hate you or whatever. Yeah, but I guess the whole premise being like Puzo starting out the whole thing and being involved in it all, because he co-wrote the screenplay with Francis Ford Coppola. But it started with, of course, the book. I looked into how'd he write it, what's the history, because there's
a lot,
right.
There's a lot of tug on, well, is it accurate? What parts of it is he drawing on? Has it become just sort of a catch-all for the Mafia and Italians?
Right.
Almost just a lazy, lazy catch-all, if you will. So that is one of the, I guess, probably the first and foremost like looming thing that I was curious about is, well, what about The Godfather is real and what about it is Mario's creation?
Yeah, so we'll start his early life, Italian immigrant family, although he never met an honest-to-God mobster, mafia person. That's what he said. All of the work in the book was research, so based on stuff that he had looked up, but he had no personal experience. He wasn't a made man involved in any of it. And then that's where all the rumors come about of like, oh, somebody paid him a bunch from the mob to make this positive piece about it, or he must have been involved somehow and is covering it up. But he was not.
I really enjoyed how they set it up in the show, because he's kind of getting tug and pull from both sides of his wife, and his agent are saying, you need to put out something. You need to put out something that we can sell. You need to put out anything.
Yeah.
And one comment from the agent is that, well, the mob part of this last failed thing that he had done seemed to get people's attention. Have you thought about any of that? And he kind of blows it off. And because he doesn't know anything about that kind of stuff, they're killers. We're not killers. He looks at his wife. They're very like homely, like, innocent people. And then the wife said something incredibly succinct that really summed it up. And it's like, yeah, we're not killers, but maybe the book is about finding out how we could be. I'm doing a bad job of paraphrasing.
Right.
But this book is about discovering how you might be pushed to kill. And there, he's inspired. And I thought that was very succinct. I was like, it's interesting. That's a very interesting place. Well, what if it's such an unrelatable place to go, these ruthless killers for business, what is your way in to actually make it compelling or relevant or
Yeah.
emotional, empathetic, and instantly the light bulb was there. I really appreciated that part of it.
Yeah. I couldn't find anything related to that specific instance.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
So perhaps that's dramatized, but you're 100% right that he
Hmm.
had published 2 novels. They got good reviews, made absolutely no money. $6,500 took, 10 years between both of them to write. It's like, that's not enough money at all. And so he had worked as a government clerk, was in adventure magazines. He's doing stuff. But he has 5 kids, and he's like, I'd better make some money because he also owed
Oh
20,000 in
my gosh.
loans
Oh
and
my
had a
gosh, yeah.
10-page outline for this more, like you said, the Mafia stuff in the second failed book, which we'll get into at the very end about what was that about, minus the small
Right.
Mafia stuff that he turned into this whole other big thing. So with this, he wrote it in 3 years from research. In his autobiography, I think it's worth bringing up because he just has this section at the end that was rather touching to me called Notes from an
Yeah.
Unsuccessful Writer's Diary. And
Oh, yeah.
hit me in the feels. It's journal excerpts from 1950 to 54. This is before his first failed book comes out. And he even says it's filled with self-pity and ego and naivete about art and life because he'd been writing for 15 years only to earn $300 before his first book comes out, which then also earned him a
Oh,
couple
wow.
thousand. But he's like, I don't know what I would have done if I had known it would have been another 15 years to
Right.
achieve success before The
Oh my
Godfather came
god.
out.
Yeah.
And before presenting these journal snippets, he says, maybe it will help somebody. I hope so. So
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're interested in there, I'll post a link to online copies of the book, but it was very, very much I was like, I'm reading my journal articles about me trying to write and not knowing what I'm
Well,
doing. And
this
yeah.
is this is honestly what I think the show is ultimately about is, we're creative people. You don't have to be a artist necessarily, but if you're interested in how things come together, how things happen, this is the stuff that I eat up. The,
Mhm.
the notes from a failed writer from, a name that now everybody is familiar with.
Yeah.
It's that insight into that moment in his life is so fascinating, and that's what I think we do a good job of trying to bring out those moments of the journeys of these artists and what it takes to actually get things made. I just wanted to highlight that part of it because I think that is really the grit of what we do.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of, like, the balance that he had to come to understand in this struggle is he said the publishers didn't care about art. It's like it's all he believed in for 45 years
Yeah.
from when he was a kid, because I had seen some literary references that he pulled. One of the books that he read at 15 years old that changed his life, The Brothers Karamazov, the
Hmm.
Russian epic. It has a powerful father, an impulsive elder son, a philosophical son, a good-tempered son, and an adopted stepson who's an employee. Kind of the
Okay. Yeah.
family
Yeah. Yeah.
dynamic is the same. And then a couple of the lines, the French, I guess some people would describe him as like the French Charles Dickens in terms of what he did, but Balzac, his novel Le Père Goriot in 1835, the line that is now one of like the most famous line in movies, I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Yeah.
That comes from this book. It's mutated, so the original in this French novel is, "In that case, I will make you an offer that no one would decline." But essentially, it's it's the same thing.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Look at
and
that. Look at
it's
that.
about family and rising up the ranks and all of that stuff as well, so
Everything comes from
yeah.
something, man.
Yeah.
Everything comes from something. And
Yeah.
of course, this is one of the most famous lines,
Yeah.
certainly of cinema history. And we are now tracing it back to where the root of the line really comes from. All the more to kind of like peel back the mystique, peel back the curtain, the man behind the curtain of like, well, how did these things happen? The most popular, like famous line in cinema history is actually a parallel is inspired right out of something else.
Yeah.
That's
Well, and that's
that's incredible.
just to draw to also of Mario Puzo being like, I tried to be an artist. I think he still is an artist, but in terms of like, he really knows literature and wanted to write like amazing literary type novels. And that's a lot of criticism that the Godfather book gets, is perhaps it's maybe not the most a tale of two cities type work, but he does
Hmm.
know this and has worked so hard to merge the two.
Right.
Eventually he gets going with this, gets a $5,000 advance. In this time, Paramount was doing something weird for studios, which is getting stuff before it had gotten made and successful in terms of adapting work. So they found out about the
Optioning it
novel.
early.
Right, right, exactly. 67. The novel came out in 69. So they had known about it from a literary scout who contacted the Paramount VP about this manuscript, and they then offered him money, $12,500 for the option, 80,000 if it gets made into a film, and they were
Hmm,
floating him money as he's writing it as well. And it's like, how could you say no to that?
right.
Because he allegedly needed money to pay off for gambling. That's how he knows the Las Vegas side of things as well. He's a veteran gambler. But of course,
Mm,
you're going to accept that because it hasn't
right.
it hasn't even been written yet. It hasn't even been made into what you know. Of course, he would have accepted more than $12,000 to start. That's how Paramount gets involved.
That's wild. That's so interesting because I don't know of anything like that. I mean, yeah, that happens, but you just don't hear about that kind of stuff. That all happens,
Yeah.
well behind closed doors. So that's fascinating.
But yeah, this was odd for Paramount, a major studio at the time, from what I could tell.
Right.
But yeah, as far as the book also, he wasn't even super happy with it. So he had done a draft, maybe a couple, and then went away to Europe. And the reason he's going to Europe, his wife hadn't seen her family for 20 years. And he said, this is the year to do it. And we have some money, but he's using credit cards. He still owes $8,000 in loans to the credit cards,
Wow.
let alone
Yeah.
everything else. In this autobiography, he's like, I'll sell the house, I'll go to jail. Writers have done a lot worse. Like it's not anything. But when he gets back, the publisher has already shown it to another paperback publisher, even though he said it's not done. They thought it
Oh
was
man.
done. And they said, we showed it to them, but they offered us $375,000. We're going to turn it down and wait for $410,000. And he's like,
Whoa.
if somebody's going to decline 375,000, they must know what they're doing. So he was not
Right.
worried. And this became the largest advance in paperback history up to that point.
Oh my
And
God.
he's loaded. He's got hundreds of thousands of dollars now. Uh,
Overnight. Holy God.
yeah. And so published in 69 on the bestseller list for over a year. And this is where he appeared once on the Today Show and felt foolish and felt like there were quotes out of context. And so that's when he ceased interviews and said, I'm not doing anything like this.
Oh.
He said it's
That's
not.
sad too. The way they present him is so earnest, and
Mhm,
he tries really hard, but the characterization of a writer was very, very true and earnest. And you want this guy to succeed. And there are times when he sees it, and he ultimately everybody knows he can do it, but then he has all this self doubt. He has this
mhm,
crippling, so it just weeds in. He goes through these highs and these valleys.
mhm.
And it's really, really, as a writer, as a creative, I was just living for their depiction of him, because you really want him to do well. You want him to
Yeah.
succeed. He's a really, in a sea of sharks. Basically,
Mhm.
this is a real earthy guy trying to do his best and trying to do his best by everybody, and he just doesn't know if he's good enough. And everybody's sitting around, of course you're good enough. Just do the work. It was great. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved it.
Yeah, he's definitely what I got from the autobiography is real down to earth in that sense. And like the notes from an unsuccessful writer, like
I know,
he
yeah.
had been trying and trying and trying. And so that money sense also haunts him. So I don't, part of this comes from Paramount's side. I don't know if they mention in the show at all, but there was another movie that came out around this time that did poorly. Do they get into that in the early parts of the
No,
show?
no, I can't remember. No, I
This was
don't think
super
they talk about a
interesting to
rival
me.
mobster movie. No.
So the book came out in 69, and then once it was successful, they were like, "Well, we gotta make this into a movie," but they had made a movie in 68 called The Brotherhood, which did really
Mm,
poorly at the box office, and people are like, "Oh, it copied The Godfather," but it's like, it's the same studio, and the book wasn't done, so they couldn't have it was just like I guess
right.
nowadays people say it's not as bad when you look at it. It's, Kirk Douglas is the main actor, so it's not a B movie. They put
Oh,
money
interesting.
into it.
Yeah.
He is a mafia leader. But I guess this was a big reason that the producer Evans
Bob
wanted to
Evans.
change things. Yeah, Bob Evans wanted to change things with The Godfather because he believed that a lack of Italian descent for the actors and the key crew was a big reason this film sucked. And
Right.
the quote from him, he was like, he wanted to smell the pasta. And he's like, you don't smell the pasta in this film, The Brotherhood. And then I thought it was interesting too, and maybe this is just my own postulations, but the poster for this film features Kirk Douglas and his son, and it's very common to kiss on the lips in this
Oh.
particular culture and line of work and everything. And so the poster features a male on male kiss, and it's called The Brotherhood. And I wonder if it was just poor marketing on their
Oh,
part
wow.
as well. I'll post a link in the show notes so you can see it. But
Yeah.
it like it may not, it doesn't give off the vibe of Murder and Mafia in my mind.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah,
They centered that as their key art. I'm looking it
yeah.
up
You
now.
see it, yeah,
I'm pretty shocked. That's bizarre.
yeah.
I've never seen anything quite like that because like the message
The
that that
Brotherhood, yeah,
sends is just like really
not
really
where they're
far
going.
off. You can see immediately the difference between something like this and The Godfather.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, when you hear Bob Evans going, "I want to smell the pasta," like, and then you look at what I'm seeing here, the poster for this Kirk Douglas, like in fully embracing a man. This is a very different story. Like, there's nothing wrong with
mhm,
that. I'm just like, but it's not the like macho, like male obsessed, like
yeah, yeah.
narrative that The Godfather is.
Yeah, so it's its own film in its own right, but it just did not do well at all.
Sure, yeah.
So they're
That's
trying to
just a
course
misfire of
correct.
marketing. I'm just baffled at the marketing on this because like
Yeah,
it all comes especially at that time because they have so few images, they have such little material to work with. The name of the game is what image sells our story.
yeah, so I was puzzled at that, but they get, barring this gaffe of a failed film on their end, they say, "We're still gonna do The Godfather," and we got the book for super cheap. They end up getting Mario to also work on the screenplay, and I had seen in an interview, it's like, "Well, why'd you do that?" And he said, "Well, they came to me and for the money. Also, my novels were taking years and years. Seemed like the screenplay you had to do in 2 or 3 months. It's
Right.
thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. It's like you can't say no." And then this is where
Right.
he working on the screenplay, it hasn't even come out yet. This is where he moves or oscillates between Long Island and Hollywood and
Right.
gets unceremoniously introduced to Frank Sinatra, even though he doesn't want to. So I know that's a big part of this
Yeah. This
this
is this is so far this is probably my favorite part of the show was him being hired to do the screenplay, getting taken to Hollywood and then getting paired with Coppola, and in particular his scenes with Coppola are fantastic.
uh-huh.
And coming from a writer's creative standpoint, I felt like the two of them are all of my personalities in my head when I'm in a creative process. It was really a delight to watch them bounce off of each other. But honestly, this his self-deprecating like insecurities trudging along as he's like wants this job, gets this job, and then like realizes that it and doesn't realize, but he gets ahead of himself in terms of like how good at his job he actually is. So he's on the top of the world in one scene, and the next scene you see him and he is an absolute disaster, hasn't worked, hasn't done a page. He's
Yeah,
eating
yeah,
pasta out of the bowl in the pool and he's crying and just like admitting defeat before he's ever even started the screenplay. And it's just like the producer Ruddy is like, "What happened to Mr. 3 Days?"
yeah, yeah.
It's just like this little arc through here in the early stage of this show has been absolutely my favorite part.
Yeah, it's very much the case. So I had seen that Puzo had written the first draft based on what the studio wanted, which was to set it in modern times so they could shoot on the backlots and save money. But then when
Hmm.
Coppola was hired, they did write separately but remained in contact and kept throwing things back and forth.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then this is part of the reason it says Mario Puzo's The Godfather, even though it's the movie and it was a bunch of people. And if anything, usually it's like the director. But from what I could tell, I don't know if this is the reason, but it was a reason. It was Coppola's wish to have his name on there because it was
Oh.
basically still his story because they didn't set it in modern times and he did write the screenplay. And so
Right.
It was
Yeah.
it
Okay.
was
So
his
it was
thing,
on Coppola's request. That's very interesting.
from what I
That's
could
rare.
find. Yeah.
It's just a very rare thing. It's not something you see very often. I can only off the top of my head think of some of you know, John Carpenter is one that usually gets that
Yeah.
kind of thing, and it's contractual. That's not
Right,
a
because this
mistake.
is not
When
the official title. It's in the poster, but it's not what you have to refer to the thing
right,
as, you know? Yeah.
right,
So I
right,
thought
right.
that, but it does speak to their connection in at least the writing process,
Mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm.
Puzo was a consultant, but then went to the film set a couple days and then said, I have no business here. This is other people's stuff." Before we get into all that, I know we've been joshing about it, the Frank Sinatra, what he
Yes.
what the heck he did to him, because there was an altercation with them. He did yell at him, threaten to beat him up.
I was shocked at this because it comes off as something that seems dramatized almost, but apparently this was what I found out to be the moment that inspired the writer creator of The Offer, the show.
Right.
He said, "Oh, there is a show here." There, I got, and on this one instance, Mario Puzo almost getting in a fight with Frank Sinatra in Hollywood, that's the beginning. That's enough to go on like making a show about making the Godfather.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought
So
that was wild to find out that there's something that almost seems like dramatized and insane is actually the truest, probably the truest part about a lot of it, and then was the reason the show even comes together as a concept at all.
yeah, so this is what was happening when he was in Hollywood and he was working on these various drafts. And the reason, because it doesn't really make sense thinking about just the film itself, but the book was super successful. Everybody knew about it.
Right.
And the Frank Sinatra-esque character has a much larger role in the novel, his past, his family, his friends, his life in Hollywood. And Puzo thought, oh, I'm presenting this character in a more sympathetic portrayal of the plights that he might have.
Hmm.
And Frank Sinatra didn't see it as such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The interpretations of what happened vary to where they were like needing people to hold each other back. And then
Right.
in Puzo's version, Frank Sinatra doesn't even swear. He just looks down at his plate and keeps uttering angry things at him.
Huh.
So the
Interesting.
the volume of the altercation shifts drastically. But I guess it's like, why would he be so mad about the portrayal of him having mafia connections unless there was some rumors or
Exactly.
yeah, that kind of
And
thing.
that's this is part of this whole the mystique of the Godfather again that on the outset don't understand is Sinatra's connection to the mob and what that looked like. Because in what you're telling me, he's exactly spot on. I'm like, oh, it looks like you don't want to be seen in that light because it's like strikingly true. And so, how is that possible?
Yeah.
The rumors about Sinatra being involved with the mob are ubiquitous. They're huge, but they're to the point where like people are, yeah, they're fact. But I don't know. I am a layman on this. So I'm just like, well, what do we know of the truth of his mob connections, and why would
Yeah.
the Jimmy Fontaine character even exist if it weren't somewhat real?
Yeah, so the real stuff, he did have an FBI file that was released in '98 that kinda showed all that
Oh
they had been
wow.
tracking him for 40 years, and he
So
had
they were like right
interacted.
after he died. Didn't he
Yeah, yeah,
die
yeah,
like
yeah,
right around?
yeah.
Yeah. So like
That's when
right
it can be
after he died, they're
released.
like, here you go.
Here it is, everyone. Yeah, he interacted with many famous mobsters, but of course said, "Yeah, I interacted with him, but it doesn't mean I was a made man and involved and all that." You know, he's like, if
Right.
Saint Francis was a singer at a saloon, he would be around the people that run the saloon and the prohibition people and all that stuff,
Right.
but it doesn't mean I was involved. But the big stink was two of them, actually. His band leader, Dorsey, had him locked into a group contract and he couldn't get out of this contract. And Dorsey was
Oh wow.
heavy on, you're going to follow this down to the letter. And according to his account, he was muscled into revoking it by some unsavory characters saying,
Wow.
I heard that Frank's gonna go solo, you know, with a gun to his chest. And so that's the first instance in the media and the rumor mill of, oh, he's got some skin in the game with these guys. And then, of
When you're
course,
getting pulled into it, basically,
yeah,
I can see
yeah,
that, and that adds to his frustration of being associated with it because he wants to believe that he's not, but ultimately, from our
yeah.
perspective, if you even if you're saying, "Yeah, I'm not," but that's just how things go, you are involved in it. Like, it's starting to become clear
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. There was also a time where the Vegas casinos were majority mob owned, and he had a stake in them, and it's a symbiotic relationship because he's drawing in a crowd and
Right, right, right.
increasing the availability, and so it's
I'm
like
not involved with them. Well, then take your name off the building.
et cetera, et cetera. The big thing that really got him, he had some failed TV work, and getting the role in From Here to Eternity, similar to Dorsey, the band leader, a producer was terrorized into casting him. And so that is
God,
really what The Godfather pulls from, because that's the Jimmy Fontaine character. The
yeah.
producer is being terrorized to get him
Wow.
cast. So that's all the truth of Frank Sinatra and his dealings. Um,
That's fascinating.
though he so you could see why, especially, yeah, in the 70s. He's over it. He doesn't want it, you know?
Yeah.
So then the film comes out in 72. It all gets put together. Very different from other mafia noir works in the psychological depth, organized crime and business and politics together. This then also becomes part of like the Frank Sinatra mythology of all this. It's like,
Mhm.
was the mob involved? Were they threatening producers? Were they extras? You know, how does
Huh.
Joe Colombo, head Italian mobster? All of that is definitely in
Right.
the show, I know, but it's been
There's an element to the show that leads it for me thematically that I think is pretty important here in terms of like what they were trying to say about at least what it takes to get something like this done. But they've set up the show talking about these three different worlds. You have the filmmakers, which you're seeing that through the eyes of Ruddy, who's new to the world, so he's being taught about filmmaking while he's doing all of this. Then you have Bob Evans, the Paramount upper echelon executives.
yeah.
And then you have Columbo and the real mobsters and their opposition to this production.
Mhm.
And so you get Bob Evans coaching this guy how to navigate Hollywood, how to navigate the studio system. And then in turn, when the heat starts turning up, you see the training that Bob Evans gave him about how to read an audience and play to your room start to work when he starts to actually interface with Columbo, and he
Mhm.
works that magic on Columbo, and they become kind of buddy buddy, and they end up realizing that they can help each other in a very strange way. But I love the Bob Evans character inadvertently training him to win over this mob boss. It's the completely indirect, but I saw it straight through the middle. I went, "Oh my
Yeah.
god!" For in episode one, Bob Evans is telling him how to do it, and in episode three, Columbo is his best friend, and I'm just like, that's what it was doing. I just thought that
Yeah.
element and how it navigated those three separate worlds and how they related to each other, and then really were that the advice is valid in all areas. I thought was really fascinating. I just thought that was an interesting part of this that kind of sets up what the different point of views were while
Yeah.
this production was going down.
What is interesting, the points of view, I'll post a link to an article recently in Deadline, because there was the other producer, Peter Bart, who bought the book, and then Bob Evans, who has passed, so he was not involved. But they have very differing accounts from Ruddy of how
Mm.
drastically the mafia and Joe Colombo were threatening, or, they thought, or according to
Hmm.
Peter Bart, that he was paranoid and nothing. It was more they loved it and they were helping out and they were involved.
But
But
that's
it
how he
was, yeah,
turned it. Is you actually is he goes to meet with Columbo, and it's a very tense. Like, do not make this movie. Go back to Hollywood and make a cowboy movie. And that's like that's the ten.
yeah,
And then he
yeah,
turns it in. Reddy turns it right there. He's like, no, no. Why don't you come down to my offices? For anybody looking to be maybe a producer in in the
yeah,
future, this
yeah.
this series is really talking to you about how to produce. This is such a valid notion to like, well, if who you see as maybe your opposition, perhaps they could be a really amazing ally if you could make them feel a part
Yeah.
of what you're doing. If you can find common ground, if you can find a common goal and bring them into the fold, now you're cooking with gas.
I guess what I would was saying, just as for our audience to have a context for it with this show, is this is from the memories of Ruddy. And so Peter Bart and Bob Evans are much less in the mind that all the you know, the threats and the the like,
Yeah, they're
oh, the
freaked out.
Godfather is
Yeah.
well, no, no,
Yeah.
no, that like the Godfather is happening in real life to us. They're like, that was not the case. There were no threats over the phone. There's not bullet holes in his car. Like all of
Gotcha,
these
gotcha,
things are
gotcha.
hearsay. And so that's
Yeah, they
kind
have
of
a scene where Bob Evans finds the book with with a bloody rat in it in
right.
his
That kind of
bedroom.
stuff is like
Yeah,
not
that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. So, but what you are saying, which is that they did become involved and were very crucial to adding the authenticity and helping them
Mhm.
get it done in New York, is entirely true, and
And that's
also
what I
led
understand is
by
Columbo absolutely did go to the offices and read the script, and ultimately didn't read the script because who's going to do that is kind of
right. I
vague.
guess
Because
it's
the
it's
idea of the scene was like, well, nobody's going to read this right now. Thanks for doing this.
yeah, yeah. So I had looked into like the film was just it wasn't just that the mafia was not interested in it happening. It was denounced by New York Congressman Mario Biaggi. There were petitions urging boycotts. Businesses near filming refused. The Teamsters wanted to stop production and deliveries. Like it's the whole Italian
Wow.
American community, not
Yeah.
just people
Well,
involved in the
they
five
were saying
families.
they're purporting that the Columbo character, oh, he creates the pro Italian,
Yeah, so it's the
association.
yeah, the Italian American Civil Rights League, which he created
Right.
in 1970. Yeah.
Whipping up the public interest against the book and then against the production. And that's where you going into the, I guess the fourth episode is they have just joined forces and kind of found their common ground of what does the movie need to do that the book didn't to make you happy, which is a really interesting notion.
Right, and I guess the thing that was a big deal was get rid of the word mafia,
Exactly, yeah.
because with this IACRL, the league that Joe Colombo, notable mobster, is saying, well, he had gotten the Justice Department and the NYPD to not use that word in press releases
Right.
because it's like a disparaging thing, and so he also again, Frank Sinatra, they raised $500,000 at this benefit concert at Madison Square Garden.
I'm not with these guys.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess part of the Ruddy producerial genius was apparently, according to Puzo, the screenplay only had 2 instances of the word mafia, which was actually
Right.
the original title of the book. It was just Mafia. That was
Oh,
when he
oh
was
yeah,
pitching it.
yeah.
And so they replaced
Again,
those yeah.
just another note. An amazingly astute filmmaking, producerial note here is you. So your adversary says, "I need this out of it," and you make it sound like that's totally possible.
Yeah.
The director, Coppola, is smart enough to know what is important to his story and what is not. The word mafia or mafioso is not important to his story. Locking the amazing location for the opening wedding scene is important to the story. We just
Yeah.
got this. I don't need the word mafia. It's only in there. It's not like it's some integral thing. It's not like we're making Titanic and you can't say ship, something like that.
Right.
Like it almost it becomes a filmmaking challenge if it were in there a bunch. But
Yeah, yeah.
Columbo doesn't know. He didn't read the script. He just doesn't want it to be in there. He doesn't. It could
Yeah.
be littered with it. So Ruddy is saying, "Oh yeah, we'll take it on everywhere it is. No problem. We'll get on that right now." Turn around to Coppola. Well, it's only used once or twice, but I
Yeah,
love the
yeah.
line. Listen to the line. I need you to get rid of it. No problem.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just that's how making things goes. That's what that shows you the power dynamics, the roles, and how they conflate with each other. And I just appreciated how they were depicting a producer and a director role against what they would call, and the adversary in this role, the Columbo character who needs something that. How do you
Yeah.
make him feel like he's getting more than he actually is? Because it was nothing to take it out of out of the script.
Right. And then following that, it's like they're completely on board and maybe they're gonna cast some people, which they did,
Now
and
they're
like you said,
Hollywood, baby. They're part
they're
of it. Exactly. That
yeah,
bring them in, baby.
bending over backwards to help him with locations and like so I'll post another link to an article from 1971. Nick Pileggi was the only reporter who could visit set and be involved from the New York Times. And so he has an interesting account of how it all went down too. because he's like, yeah, the movie was celebrated. They weren't. It wasn't threatening at all when I, there wasn't some mobsters behind me twirling a cigar waiting for them to mess up. It's like, no, they
Right.
were trying to find a way to make it great, and they loved it. And actors are, hanging out with them, showing them how to talk and what they
Yeah,
say, and
yeah.
it added this authenticity to it all
They're getting the full
because,
Hollywood.
yeah, you've got the actual people on set, and they're working really hard to make it look good.
It's
Yeah,
reminding me of our episode on Candyman and the Caprini Green community.
yeah.
Wasn't that also similar? And the director helped get them
Oh,
involved
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah, yeah.
a similar situation.
Mhm.
When you're doing these types of things, who might be your adversary might be a huge a huge teammate if
Yeah,
you can find that route.
yeah. And so with this will be our last bit, kind of what happened when this did actually get finished. It was interesting, the word Godfather is attributed as a creation of Mario Puzo.
Really.
Nobody in the crime families
Huh.
used that that word at all.
That's interesting.
It's a bit more, spread
Right.
out than that. So, yeah, that title then was just bestowed by the media for like Mafia, like in press releases and whatnot.
It's not doesn't seem to be cause and effect, but you can't say Mafia. Mafia is the original title.
Yeah.
You have to create something that can do the work of Mafia. And that
Yeah.
means create something. So okay, now your parameters are kind of set, but you have to what's something that can do that work. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to pull it directly out of something, but I'm seeing the choice of Godfather now as being a real silent key here about getting around the word mafia at all. And then beyond the movie, its impact onto our culture and zeitgeist is we're not saying mafia, we're saying
He's not
Godfather.
a mafia don. Yeah, it's the word. Yeah, definitely. I
So
think
it accomplishes the Columbo goal, which is
mhm.
to eradicate that word out of the popular conscious, and
Get a new one,
replaces it
yeah.
with something made up. It's created. It's a movie, literally the movie version. So
Yeah, yeah, and
that's a silent MVP for me, is because it doesn't seem directly cause and effect. We can't use mafia.
yeah, yeah.
That's all before land in the novel time, but it seems to be that ultimately that is the choice that accomplishes everything that Columbo was worried about.
Yeah, and then with their involvement, it's like in terms of Italian American culture as mobsters, does squash a lot of stereotypes because previous films, it's all from the perspective of an outraged outsider or, you
Oh,
know,
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
some mobster going down in a blaze of glory after kidnapping someone, and this is more about the sense of family and love and depth, and it's not some illiterate gangster trope.
Exactly. They were
Yeah,
upset and worried that they would be depicted, quote, that their people would be depicted as animals.
yeah,
Um, and that was the pitch back to them is like, on the contrary, we're trying to humanize. Again, going back to the original, the wife's, thought to Mario is like, well, we can't imagine killing, but imagine the road it would take to be okay with that.
mhm,
That's the work of it. That's humanizing. Yeah, I could see immediately how that's easy. Again, you just swipe everything into that catch-all,
yeah,
that easy Italian catch-all, which is what they were very concerned with avoiding.
mhm.
Very interesting.
So then that perception perpetuates to media in film and TV. Scorsese's Goodfellas, of course, The
Yes,
Sopranos on
yes, yes.
TV forever. It is The Godfather's take on a sense of family and duty and a coherent,
Right.
philosophical almost nature to the whole thing, which I this is wild to me. There was a study done by the Italic Institute of America. So in the
Hmm.
past 100 years, which would almost be the totality of filmmaking, 81% of films featuring Italian Americans as mobsters was made after The Godfather.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So there were quite a
That's
few
interesting.
films made in this, but it wasn't it exploded. This specific type of mobster mafia film is Italian
Hmm.
American, this whole family sensibility to it.
I'm I'm just pulling off of the random cinema trees, but it makes me instantly kind of appreciate the swing that is Scarface, because a very different attempt at that.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
very, in terms of like on its face, a very similar crime mob movie, but it's a very different culturally, very different
Mhm.
in a setting sense, all the way around. So that, and it's just very interesting. I had not even thought about the statistics before and after in terms of like volume of the genre.
Yeah, it was like 10 a year for a while that
Hmm.
could be labeled as such. Yeah. The downside, though, is the scrutiny, which is then overly associating Italian immigrants with organized crime, because if
Right.
that's the majority of what you're seeing. So FBI, this is more statistics because that's who I am, but
Mm?
in 2009, they looked at who they knew of the crime families and whatnot. 0.008% of Italian Americans have some sort of criminal association. That is so
Doesn't that, yeah, that's gotta be
0.008%.
on par with the rest of the population, right?
But yeah, but then in a different study, 74% of the American public believe that Italian Americans have ties to the mob,
Oh, good, we're insane.
which is just I mean, it's like
It's bananas. It's
so
outrageous.
yeah, one could say that it was a blessing and a curse of being like, "Oh, yeah, this is showing this nuanced portrayal," but then at the same time, people only think that that's what it is.
It's like going out and getting a boat to kill sharks after seeing Jaws.
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't it's like, it's a movie, folks.
mhm,
Oh
yeah.
my
But
god.
then
We're
the
taking
other
stuff
side,
too seriously.
so the 0.008% that can take it seriously because they're actually in the crime families, this was their reaction to it. Just a particular guy, Salvatore Gravano, the underboss of the Gambino crime family, he said he floated out of the theater. He's like, "That was our life. Many guys felt the same way."
Hmm.
Kind of interesting that they're like, "Oh, we're seeing,
Mhm.
we're, this perception and
They
the."
walk out, no, they walk out, "I've been seen.
Yeah, basically.
They know
Uh,
me. They've
yeah.
heard me." That's
Uh,
that's beautiful. That's what
yeah.
I mean, what do you want? What do you want? What do you, as, like, setting out to make something like this, if you could, like, bring the real, like, mobster killer
Mm.
to tears and being like, "I've been touched." Like, that you
Well,
did
yeah.
it.
Well, and then even some imitation. So Anthony Fiato, who was a hitman for the LA crime family, then became undercover and then was in witness protection. He said that certain family members of the families that he was involved in changed their speech to imitate Vito Corleone. They
Oh
stopped
my god.
swearing as much. They improved their grammar. They were philosophizing more, which is
Oh,
hilarious.
wow. Oh, wow.
That it was like, oh,
They're
we want to
taking
be
notes.
like get to a
They
higher
got good
standard here.
ideas in here. Yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
we're not just ruthless killers. Yeah, there is moral
That's
ambiguity.
right.
Yeah, that's on the good marks on the gangster side as well. So
Wow.
all of those beautiful things.
It's so fascinating that Puzo was able ultimately to, like, get that to humanize exactly what he set out to humanize,
Yeah,
basically. If they're walking out of the theaters going, "I've been seen," it's when you go back to the, in the show, the moment between him and his wife, and be like, well, maybe the book is about the road to being to
mm,
understand killing.
yeah,
Like, I
yes.
think, yeah, I think you did it.
So that I did find a little bit on. We had briefly mentioned his failed two books, and then that compelled him to
Hmm.
say, "Oh, I'm going to pull the little Mafia bit from this second book," which his second failed book, which is actually his favorite book.
It's just teased. Right, it's
Yeah,
barely just teased in the first episode. Nobody bought it. Nobody came to see him. It's another failure, and immediately talking about, well, what can we do? What do I got to do next? What, and going on to the agent, going like, well, we like the mob. The people seem to like the mobster part of the thing.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's just barely in the first episode.
It reminds me a lot of Pachinko. It's called The Fortunate
Hmm.
Pilgrim. It's based on his own mother. So it follows the mother as the matriarch of this family of immigrants in New York City through the Great Depression, World War II, the conflict of Italian and
Mm.
American values. Like with
Yeah.
Pachinko, the Korean Japanese. Like I said, it bombed, but it was his favorite.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough mob violence. One of the side characters is involved, and so that's where that then becomes the main thing. But this was super
Right.
interesting. In a updated preface to The Fortunate Pilgrim, he wrote, "Whenever the Godfather opened his mouth, in my own mind, I heard the words of my mother. I heard her wisdom, her ruthlessness, and her unconquerable love for her family and for
Mm,
life itself, qualities not valued in women at the time. The Don's courage and loyalty came from her, his humanity came from her. So I know now, without Lucia Santa,
wow.
I could not have written The Godfather. So it's basically him saying all of this I owe to my mom, and she really was the inspiration. And that's where you get, because that's the whole thing of like The Godfather is this
I
hyper
got
masculine,
chills.
chauvinistic, yeah. But it
I
all
seriously, I got chills throughout my whole body, is saying, purporting that the Don is really
reflection of his
a
mom.
port a reflection of his mother. How incredible! I mean, how I mean, again, to say to for something that has become this like macho staple of like masculinity, like men
Yeah.
are obsessed with the Godfather.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The idea that the Don is really, really inspired by Mario Puzo's mother. I mean, it's beyond interesting. It's beyond impactful. I mean, it goes to say, I mean, you start to go into like thinking about feminism and film and all
Mhm.
those types of things. It's like it makes me instantly think of Alien.
Yeah, yeah.
Ripley character is written as a man, casted as a woman. That's
Well, it's
exactly
interesting.
what it looks like they did with the Dawn, and in a very like arm's distance, kind of parallel. But
Well, I would say for all those,
that's
because
amazing.
you don't people don't know about this at all, and I would say it's probably a amazing companion piece. If you're gonna watch The Godfather 1 and
Yeah. Oh
2
my
or read the
gosh.
book, go read The Fortunate Pilgrim, the female
Oh,
side of Italian immigrant story at this exact place and time, and
wow.
the guy who wrote it said, "Oh, yeah, this is my favorite thing. This is what started it all. This is the art that I actually wanted people to see." Yeah.
Exactly. I love what the character says about it. He's like, I really thought people would relate to this. I thought I really had put, the plight
Mhm.
of our culture on the page. I thought
Yeah,
people
yeah.
would see themselves in it. That was such a little window, a glimmer into this book, but I cannot believe how really influential it is on the work The Godfather.
Yeah.
Wow, what an amazing little discovery there. The Dawn, a woman, a companion piece about women. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god, we're pulling out all the stops here today, Taylor. I can't thank
Yeah.
you enough. Audience, we love you. Thank you for sticking with us. If you're listening to this right now, if you would, give us a like, give us a rating, suggest an episode on that topic about that friend who's always talking about that thing. If it reminds you of them, send it to them. The ratings, the sharing, that's how we get this going. That's how we keep doing what we do here and bringing you the facts every week.
And you can do so at Illiterate Pod on Instagram. Send us a message.
Please reach out if you want us to cover something. You never know what we're going to do. And we will catch you right back here next week, y'all.